In this video, I'd like to deal with the situation of a player choosing a bin, distributing the stones, and having the last stone fall in an empty bin on their side. When that happens, they're able to place that stone in their Mancala and claim any stones on the other side of the board. So if player 1, in this case, chooses bin E, their last stone landed here in what had been an empty bin, so they should actually get all 6 of these stones. So to add this into our code, I'm going to adjust this block of code at the end. I'm going to add an else if command here and check to see if it's player 1's turn. So if player 1 is true, and I'll check to see if the bin amount treated as an integer that's at the location of the last recipient, I want to check to see if that equals 1, which means that it had been empty before the last stone was placed into it. And I want to make sure that the last recipient value is less than 6, which means that the bin that received the last stone is on player 1's side of the board. To do this last comparison though, let me be careful about this. I need to make sure that last recipient is interpreted as an integer to make a less than comparison. So if all of that is true, and I should mention the AND connector requires that all 3 of these elements are true. If all of that is true, I want the bin amount for player 1's Mancala, which is at index 6, to equal whatever's in there plus the value of the bin amount that received the last stone, which is really just 1, but let me say last recipient, and however many stones, if any, are in the bin across from the last recipient on player 2's side of the board. So that bin is going to be at index 12 minus, treated as an integer, the last recipient. For example, if the last recipient is in this bin, it has an index of 5. The bin across from it has an index of 7. So 12 minus index 5 will give me 7. So now I also need to adjust some other bin amounts. The bin amount in the last recipient position, I want that to be set to 0, as well as the bin amount across from it, which again is at index 12 minus the value of the last recipient. So I'd like that to be set to 0 as well. Now I want to do one more thing at this point. I want to switch from player 1 to player 2. And so I'll do that with the toggle player 1 equals not player 1. So the value of player 1 had been true, and now it will become false. And let me quit the current version of the game and check our code. So running this new code, I want to choose a value like A for player 1. Let me choose C for player 2. And then if I choose E, these 4 stones will land with the last one in that empty bin. And we see what we were hoping to see. The last stone that landed there was placed into player 1's Mancala, and the 5 stones across were also placed in player 1's Mancala, and it went over to player 2's turn. So in this case, player 1 doesn't get to go again, it switches to player 2, which is what we set up in this line 115. Now I want something similar to happen if player 2 lands in an empty bin on their side of the board, and the code is going to be quite similar. So let me copy this and add it here and adjust it for player 2. So in this case, I want to change this to not player 1. So when the player 1 variable is false, the second part here can stay the same. I want the bin amount at the last recipient position to equal 1, which means that it had been empty before that last stone was placed into it. But to make sure that the last recipient is on player 2's side of the board, I want to change this to a greater than 6. And because we're following this line that checked to see if the last recipient was equal to 13, I don't need to worry about that value. So this tells me that if the last recipient is greater than 6, it has to be somewhere between 7 and 12, because it can never be bigger than 13, and from this line up above, I know that it's not equal to 13. So in this case, what I need to do next is change the value in player 2's Mancala, which is at index 13. I want to take whatever is there and add to it the bin amount in the last recipient position and the bin amount across the board from that position, which from player 2's perspective is also at 12 minus the last recipient number. So that doesn't need to change, and the rest can stay the same as well. I want the bin amount at the last recipient position to switch to 0, the bin amount across the board becomes 0, and this last line will change player 1 this time from false to true. So we should be good to go. Let's check this version of the code. So I'm going to quit the current game and run this new version of the code. Now this time, let me choose F for player 1 at first, and then A for player 2. And now let me choose D for player 1. And if I choose F for player 2, those 5 stones, the last one should land in this empty bin, and player 2 will claim that stone plus the 1 stone across from it. And they did. It emptied out those 2 sides of the bin, and now player 2 has 3 stones, and it switched to player 1's turn. So this seems like a great place to end this tutorial. Next time, we'll work on setting up the end of the game.